Good evening, everybody. My name is Heather. This is Sage and Stone Homestead, and this is the 10th weekly garden tour of the 2022 garden season. This here is my harvest basket that I had when I had my first garden here in 2019. It has seen better days, but I'm gonna use it until I can't. And we actually finally did get rain this past week. We got around a cumulative inch, but it has meant worlds to the garden. For some reason, I could soak with the hose all day and it can't water as well as 1 inch of rain can. Thankfully, none of our tomatoes seem to have cracked. You can see through the trellis here on the other side of the U-shaped bed, our melons have really taken off. I think there's only 5 plants over there, but you'd never know it. The whole thing is absolutely covered. And what's funny is at least one of the melons has taken to the trellis and is sharing some space with the tomatoes. Look at how pretty that one is. We haven't even made it through the tunnel yet, and my basket is full. This is why I needed to upgrade. Cucumbers are flowering, and maybe by this time next week we will have harvestable cukes. Once cucumbers really get going, it doesn't take long before you are just inundated. If I can find the clip from last week where I was crouching in this exact spot, I'm gonna put it in here. This is how much the rain has truly helped the growth of everything. I planted a sunflower in here and it is peeking up above, but hopefully the melons won't take it down before it can get really big. There's another mammoth sunflower down here. This one should do fine. Because we didn't have any rain, I wasn't doing a whole lot of mowing. I still actually haven't mowed our lawn. It's probably been about a month. But because we had been watering in here, the grass in the garden here just got really out of hand. Thankfully, Levi was able to come in here with the weed whacker, but we're coming up on that time of year when it's just really hot most of the time, and it's hard to get out to the garden, and sometimes it gets away from the best of us. The bush beans here are getting quite sizable. I'm gonna bet by about this time next week we'll start seeing our first blooms on these. Some of our slippery silks pole beans are starting to turn red like they're supposed to. The pole beans on this side are a drying bean, and so these beans we're going to be leaving on until they completely dry up their pods, and then we'll be able to harvest and shell them and maybe get a dinner's worth. The beans on this side, however, these are not intended to be drying beans. These bean seeds were sent to me by a subscriber, and I have kind of neglected this little patch in the last little bit. It kind of stopped putting on flowers for a little bit. Might have been the heat, I'm not really sure, but I am finding some beans in here. So I have a little bit of some sad news, you guys. Our volunteer squash looks pretty terrible. I noticed that a couple weeks ago, the leaves on the plant were kind of starting to yellow a tiny bit, and I didn't do anything about it. I probably could have, but honestly, once I learned that this volunteer gourd here wasn't something super edible, I stopped kind of caring for it, and well, that's the result. Some of the elephant garlic looks really good. Wow. Holy cow. Oops, see, pulling on it is really not the right way. You're really supposed to unearth the bulb and lift it up from the bottom, but getting a little bit excited over here. Here we go. Oh my gosh. These little things, they're on the bottom of the garlic bulb here. See it? These look like little tiny garlic cloves. These are called garlic corms. And apparently you can grow garlic from the little corms. I'm gonna leave a couple in this bed, see what happens. So what I'm gonna do with these is not wash them off. I don't wanna risk introducing any kind of moisture at this point, because the whole point right now is to get these garlic heads to dry out, because when they're dry and papery, they're going to last much longer in storage. Sit right here under the carport and dry out. So remember how I said we did get some rain the other day? It was much needed, but it came with some pretty serious winds. I feel like that's par for the course around here at this point. And the winds came through the greenhouse, and our tomatoes and some of our peppers were leaning pretty hard. We did have a couple of these tomatoes tethered up to the top purlin. As of like a couple weeks ago, we had to do many, many more because these guys are really getting top heavy. And if you weren't here for the last garden tour and you're worried about what this powdery stuff is, no worries, this is just BT. This really helped take care of a really bad hornworm problem that we had in here. And this is evidence of what happened. Absolutely a great thing about a greenhouse is when you put down a treatment, it doesn't get washed off by the rain. So overall, treatments that I have to do to these plants should be relatively inexpensive. I noticed a little bit of rust and possible blight in the garden, and I'm starting to see it a little bit on the tomatoes in here, and this is what I ordered to help remedy that. See these spotty leaves? This is disease, and disease does eventually make every tomato plant in this area of the country succumb. We've also had really, really unseasonably hot, humid weather. We can get really hot and humid in late July and August, but in June and the first part of July, it's pretty rare. So I'm gonna try to make sure that I can get everything that I can out of these plants, and I'm gonna be spraying this copper fungicide in the greenhouse. Oftentimes, organic forms of pest control and other things like disease control can be used up until the day of harvest. I don't see that listed on here. I assume it's fine, but I'm gonna go ahead and harvest the tomatoes before I spray this, just in case. We have been harvesting tomatoes in this greenhouse every 2 to 3 days. It has been such a blessing, and these determinant Heat Master tomatoes have really, really outperformed everything that I had hoped for them. I have grown determinant varieties of tomatoes in the past, but not on this kind of scale. And this is my first year with this particular variety, and I just ordered 300 more seeds because I don't want to be without it. You might be wondering why I bought seeds when I have all of these tomatoes and I could just keep the seeds out of them, except for these Heat Master tomatoes are an F1 hybrid, and I could keep the seed and I could plant it, but because it's not a stabilized gene, I'm not guaranteed to get this exact tomato next time. Now the Belgian Giants that I have in the raised bed garden, those are heirloom tomatoes. Those genes have been stabilized, and I can retain seeds out of those tomatoes and get those exact tomatoes again year after year. These are ones that the tomato hornworms got last week. They're starting to grow funny things. So why wouldn't I only grow heirloom tomatoes then, if heirloom tomatoes seem like the more sustainable option? Well, the answer is it gets really, really hot here. It's actually gotten much hotter this year than in years past, and when tomatoes experience excessive heats, it can actually cause them to drop their blossoms, and without blossoms, there's no fruit. This is our first summer growing in this greenhouse environment, and honestly, I wasn't sure how hot or how oppressive the heat was going to be inside of here. We've taken a lot of precautions to be able to keep the temperature in here at least as hot and not hotter than the outside air, and so far it seems like we're able to maintain that. But not knowing if that would be the case, I wanted to basically guarantee, as to the best of my ability, that we would get a harvest out of the greenhouse this year. So I decided to go with Heatmaster because I knew that it was bred and designed to handle high heats. And in growing with it, it seems to really have a great resistance to cracking, a great resistance to disease. Even though we're getting a little bit of disease on the plants right now, I know that my heirloom varieties, if I had trellised and treated them like I have these tomatoes, they would have died long ago, where these guys are still thriving. So don't get me wrong, I'm always going to grow heirloom tomatoes. Heirloom tomatoes are beautiful and classic. And honestly, these guys, they look a lot like what you can buy at the grocery store. And heirloom tomatoes just are not that way. But when it comes to growing a lot of food in this type of environment, I want to make sure that I'm being smart about what I choose to grow. And if I have access to the seed, I'm definitely going to be growing Heatmaster as well as my favorite heirlooms. Well, I'm not even done with one row of tomatoes, and my upgrade from my previous harvest basket is already full. I'm gonna have to come back later with one of our meat totes, but for now, let's check out the peppers. Our really pretty variegated pepper that we haven't looked at in a couple weeks is still doing well. We've been picking peppers off of it for the kids' lunches. And because we keep picking peppers off of it, I haven't had a chance to see how pretty these will be when they ripen fully. But they're super pretty, even when they're not fully ripe. Under here we have those habanadas, those heatless habaneros. Don't they look cool? I have no idea if these will ripen to be another color, but I do know they're super good. My husband really loves hot peppers, but habaneros are so hot, it's hard to tell what their flavor actually is. But these heatless habaneros kind of give you a window into what that might be. And they're really fruity, nearly apple-y in flavor. Really good. My oldest son though, he won't eat them. He doesn't trust them based on how they look. I mean, it's probably smart. So when the wind came through, it took a toll on some of our jalapenos. I pruned these jalapeno plants to try to keep them short and bushy. I know that I've grown jalapenos in the past. I don't remember them ever being this tall, but they're basically my height. Had I known they were gonna get this big, I would have brained some kind of trellis system for them in the greenhouse. I'll have to worry about that next time. When I've grown peppers in the past, I've always grown them in my raised bed garden. And in doing that, it's more of a block system, or at least staggered plants. So as they kind of fall, they support each other. But in rows here, and with the type of winds that we have here, clearly they need some more support. This jalapeno has lots of fruit on it, and so far it is alive, though toppled. The bell peppers though, they are much shorter plants, and they're behaving much like I expected them to. I need to come through here and do another harvest. Look, getting pretty big. I've already done one harvest, but I think much like the tomatoes, the harvests are just gonna keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Speaking of bigger and bigger, this melon here is one volunteer Kajari. The stem of it starts right there under the baseboard of the greenhouse, and it has just completely taken over in here. Oh, that's a Kajari. And we did have a couple green beans successfully sprout in here, and I've started to put on some beans. I tried 2 separate times to start green beans in this row over here and in the row on the other side of the greenhouse, but slugs kept taking them out. So I have a couple green bean plants in the greenhouse, but most of those plants I decided just to put them in the raised bed garden. I know you must be wondering, Heather, what on earth are you going to do with all of those tomatoes? Well, I just made a video explaining just that, and I'm going to link it up here.